It's time to enhance the relationship between expertise and impact, between knowledge and application. Welcome to a journey of discovery and empowerment. Welcome to All Physicians Lead, the Forbes Books podcast that highlights the critical leadership role that all practicing physicians take on every day. Here's Dr. Leon Morse.
What do you do when you're the leader and there's no clear answer? In healthcare, pressure is constant, emotions can run high, and decisions rarely come easily. Today's guest lives in that world. Dr. Richard Winters is an emergency medicine physician at Mayo Clinic, a leadership coach, and the author of the book, You're the Leader, Now What? We're going to talk about leading through uncertainty, making better decisions under pressure, and building teams that move forward together. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. I was very excited. I got your book and flipped through it. We'll get to talk about that a fair amount here and a lot of your other experiences. But we like to start out by telling your story. How did you grow up, get interested in medicine, emergency medicine, and then from there, the executive track, the teaching and coaching, and how'd that all play out?
Yeah. So I was a D- high school student, and then went to junior college for 2 years. Then went to University of Illinois. I was a kind of a punk rock kid, and so I was
I remember
like,
those days.
yeah.
Cool.
So I was big into music and doing my own thing and stuff. Did really well in college, and then went to Mayo Medical School, and and it's funny because when I told my parents, I think I'm thinking about becoming a doctor. They both very appropriately laughed. It's like where's the track record?
Thanks
And
for the support, Mom and
yeah,
Dad.
yeah, right. But that's kind of it. I wasn't certainly born. My parents aren't physicians. My grandmother had Lou Gehrig's disease, and she came to live with us and helped take care of her. And then around that time, when I was in college, I started working at the local hospital while I was kind of commuting downtown to the University of Illinois in Chicago, and ended up becoming a monitor tech. And so that was kind of my introduction to medicine. Had great chemistry teacher, great biology teacher, they really, those were kind of the first individuals I felt like saw me and were able to, I was able to produce some stuff and get going.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How'd you fall in love with emergency medicine?
Yeah, yeah. So in medical school, then I decided somewhere earlier on that I was going to be a pediatric cardiac surgeon, and started the surgery interest group at Mayo, and then did research with pediatric cardiac surgery, and then um, it was interesting. So there was a conversation about the surgery residents that I overheard, and this is not obviously everywhere or even now, but there was a little bit of a pride of these amazing people coming in, and then just like all they did was surgery, and kind of losing their other self, at least for that moment. And for me, that was a moment where I was like, geez, I don't know if that's me. And I don't remember even there was some test that was matching personality styles, and emergency medicine came up. And so that's how I got into it. And yeah, it was. And the nice thing for me about emergency medicine was lots of things, uh, different times of day, just that sort of freedom that I like, the intensity of getting things done, and like getting things done, all that stuff that goes together. It's interesting because my wife, who I met in medical school, she was going to be a pediatric hematologist, oncologist.
Mhm.
And as I decided emergency medicine, she said, you know what? I think I'm going to be a surgeon. And so we kind of did a bit of a swap there. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cute. That's cute. Well,
Mhm.
it's interesting that you say that personality test. Informally, I often say that if I knew then what I know now,
Yeah.
by the end of the second year of medical school, I would have known my classmates' personalities enough that probably with about 80 or 90% accuracy, I would have gone down I see you're going to be an ophthalmologist, you're going to be a neurosurgeon, you're going to be an emergency medicine doc. Personalities
Yeah.
do matter, right? You sort of
So true.
go toward people that, act like you, think like you, treat
Yeah.
patients like you. It's certainly not 100%, but
No,
but
but
we
it's
feel
interesting.
comfortable in that environment, right?
And I don't think, and we don't, I mean, I didn't have any self-awareness at that time to really understand that aspect of it. I know, for example, for my wife, she likes doing things and creating things, and like that's very, and for her, and she ended up becoming a bariatric surgeon and was
Oh
doing a
yeah.
lot of laparoscopic stuff. For her, no wasted moves and time in the OR, and just that perfection and getting that was really. But for me, I'm not as much that way. I'm more of a interesting new idea, kind of get into it, and then I move on. Next interesting
Yeah.
idea. But I think within specialties, for those individuals who go into it who are a little bit different, those are oftentimes individuals who are stretching the specialty. And
Yeah.
so there's not really, I think there's kind of the normal distribution of personalities, but any specialty anyone's into, that's what you go into.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like your improvisation, professionally and personally reaches back to the punk rocker that you described initially, right?
Yep.
Stretching the boundaries of music even then. Uh, what about the 3rd stage, if we can put it into there? How'd you end up getting into these, senior leadership positions and
Right.
diving in there? More improv?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of, I think, more similar for any of us where now we're practicing, we're in groups, we're seeing things that, geez, I wish it can be a different way. I have a voice. I'd like to, and then people are like, okay, well, why don't you start coming to the meeting? And okay, that's a great idea. Now, why don't you do that? And so that was it. Just seeing opportunities for change, and then going to meetings, and then in there, I was with a Democratic Emergency Medicine group, and I was in California at the time. I left Mayo for 20 something years and returned to Mayo. And so a lot of my work was outside of Mayo, but I ended up becoming managing partner of our group and chair of the department and stuff. Went and got an MBA because I was just sensing this difference in language between hospital administrators and physicians, and that was a really nice way for me to understand that. And then as part of that, I was introduced to coaching, executive coaching, which I'd always thought was like talking about feelings and like dream
Not
catchers and things like
exactly, right?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
what I found was, and that I went to University of Texas, that Dallas was a way to think about how I think and how I can be effective, and then how to help others do the same thing. And so those two things like really worked well together, and then ended up taking on larger leadership roles within the organization, and then felt some limitations where I was at, and then returned to Mayo. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Anything in particular stand out as you're on that journey? You mentioned the great coincidence, if you will, that worked well together with the MBA and the coaching,
Yeah.
being in leadership positions. Any particular events that you can think of that say, "Wow, this really opened my eyes and either took me down this pathway or impacted the way that I lead personally?" Those aha moments, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of so kind of there's lots of aha moments along the way, and I guess we kind of approach it from different ways. One is, as I start out thinking from my perspective and what I'm experiencing, and then starting to see that, there's a bigger picture here, and there's more to the story, and there's an aha in that, and then there's an aha in how do I understand that? How do I then put that into my kind of framing of the world, and then try to affect change? And there's some aha moments in there, and then I mean, most of the stuff. Um, that I learned was from just mistakes that I was making. Yeah, I mean, times where I felt like,
Like
geez,
most of us, right?
yeah, I didn't do a good job there, or I was missing key things there, or why did I say anything, or geez, I was coming across not like a nice guy. And those sorts of things. The nice thing though was pairing that. This was helpful for me with the executive coaching I was doing, and then realizing how normal this was, and coaching senior leaders on down, how just normal this process is of like, how are we making sense of this? How am I making sense of this? What are my derailers? Those sorts of things. Um, and then, getting burned out occasionally in the process, and then realizing that, some of this is because of organizational and kind of maybe interdepartmental or collegial stuff, but also there's a lot of how I'm making sense of things in there. And it's just kind of that, just that, like, as we get to like higher levels, um, uh, scaling our own thinking is a challenge. And it for me, it caused me to, and continues to, cause me to rethink about um, how I can be effective and how I come across, and um, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, three things that you've touched on in the last, 10 minutes and 31 seconds that we've been talking, but, um, the the idea of how normal this is, the thought of, as you didn't say specifically, but had done, reflecting on these episodes, good and bad, where you've felt very comfortable or very uncomfortable with the intent to improve, and the the concept of, as you talk about in the book, getting up on the balcony and
Yeah.
seeing things from a much broader perspective
Right.
as a leader. One of the things that I like to talk about is how important it is to recognize that you're a leader, that you have impact, even if you don't have a title. And you touch on that in several
Right.
places of the book too. I appreciated that. I was saying we think a lot alike on these, that particularly as a physician in a healthcare environment, you have influence, you have impact. We sometimes say if the doctor's having a bad day, everyone's having a bad day. It may not be that extreme anymore, but when you recognize that, it sort of flips a switch. And you've obviously done this a while ago in your career, where if you have a particularly challenging interaction, you think about it and you reflect on it with the intent to improve and do better next time. And that becomes very, very, very routine. So, how do you get that message out to all physicians that, you have this impact, you can get better, and your team and your patients will do better if you become a better leader?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so many levels to this. And so part of, and part of the reason I wrote the book, as I'm coaching these physician leaders, there's gaps in knowledge. There's gaps in frameworks. And how do I think about this? And there are like frameworks that I use all the time that I wasn't introduced in medical school. And to be honest, many of these weren't in business school. These are things that I've picked up by reading individuals, and for you the same. And so, as I'm coaching them, I'm wanting us to have the Ron Heifetz talks about the technical versus adaptive challenges we face. And for the technical challenges, those are the things that we can go and we can read a book, we can learn. I can learn how to put a central line in, and then I can do that. So a patient's needs central line, I know how to do that. But there may be an adaptive challenge of, when do I do this, and in what circumstance do I do this, and how do I adapt when things aren't going right? That's that adaptive thing. And so, from a coaching perspective, I really enjoy helping people make sense of this kind of adaptive, complex world. But I was finding that there kept on being these technical components to it. And so, I think one of the things is just helping. I mean, there are ways of going about thinking about decision making. There's ways of going about thinking about how you're leading change and how you're managing change. And so those frameworks can be very helpful. And I find that oftentimes, just by introducing the frameworks, people are like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. That's interesting." But then the next step is, then how do we bring all this kind of these, the polarities and stuff that we all have, the differences of opinion, and the tension within ourselves as we're thinking about kind of our own efficacy and being hurt and feeling bad or feeling good, maybe overly so, in the process, how we put those things together. So I think yeah, it's kind of a combination of doing um, both of those things.
Yeah. One of the things I love to use, and I'm sure you talk about it as well at some point, but Goleman's particular definitions of leadership styles are fairly easy for people to grasp. And
Mhm.
the idea that you said, have a framework or a common language so that we can talk about this, think about this, that the fact that you don't lead the same way all the time, which leadership styles are in your toolkit, which ones are you facile with, and do you employ them optimally in the various environments? We talk about healthcare leadership or leadership for physicians
Yeah.
like it's one uniform thing almost, but it's not. The environment changes, the experience changes, the way you manage it changes, you change. Some days I'm on, some days I'm tired, some days I'm upset, So all of those things come into play when you're trying to teach and coach folks about how to pick and choose what works best in this environment, what's sustainable, what's most effective in leading this team through. Very different in the trauma bay than it is in the clinic, which is very
Right.
different than it is in the boardroom,
Right.
right?
Right. And it's interesting because, as we were talking about, there's like there's personalities for specialties and what people go into. And there's leadership stuff, and in the same way, I mean, you can think of, and again, these are just generalizations, but you can think that a surgeon may be more likely, from a leadership perspective, to like the command and control sort of situation, and that is good. That's like getting to results, driving results, doing those sorts of things, and then on the other hand, you can think about, I don't know, let's say family medicine or something like that, and it may be a little bit more like let's all come together. And I think of this tension between like kumbaya, and command and control, and we need a blend of all those. There's an agility that needs to occur there,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of one thing. And how do we be agile there? But the other thing is just really fundamentally understanding how decisions are made as we think about healthcare. It doesn't tend to be from top down. I mean, I think a lot of people, as we work with companies and things like that, they think that what you do is you go to the CEO or you go to the department chair, and then the department chair is gonna decide what, all the other surgeons are gonna be doing, and that's not at all the way really in any department. I mean, we're just not that way. There are elements. There are some things, where things emerge and we need to all change together, things that are, really kind of imperiling the organization and our specialties, and that command and control can be very effective there. But a lot of the way we make decisions is more like a federation, and so we have lots of different professionals. We have all different ways. Like I use ultrasound differently. I use different, keyboard or dot phrases or ambient listening differently. I'll use this site for to look up stuff. You'll use that site, and we make decisions in this way. All of us have our personal styles, the way that we write our notes, the way that our trays for our procedures and stuff. And as we try to standardize these things, that it isn't kumbaya, because we oftentimes don't come to decisions, and it isn't command and control. It's a blend of those things.
Yeah, and when we think back to you commented a moment ago that it wasn't something you learned in medical school or residency. My thought is always if we just introduce some of these concepts much earlier on in medical education, then people would have the opportunity to become facile with them, would become routine part of their day to think, oh, how could I have done that interaction better? Or, wow, that interaction was really great. How did I set it up for success in a very stressful environment? Getting people to think like that is part of my mission over the next 20 years is at least at the individual level, but hopefully at organizational levels with schools of medicine and residency programs and professional societies to say, these things are critically important. A lot of the things that you touch on in your book are very useful for, what I refer to as frontline doctors, not just those who are going into executive leadership positions. Of course, they're very valuable there as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the interesting thing about a lot of these things, and is you kind of deliver these leadership programs and stuff, the same content means something very different at different stages of the career. And so,
Mhm.
even particular frameworks as you talk about delegating. This is kind of an easy thing, and you can think that delegating is when you're on rounds and figuring out what to do, what the medical student and residents and stuff should do. That's one level. Then all of a sudden delegation is a little bit different as you have direct reports, and then as you have multiple different direct reports, delegation is a little bit different. And so your ability to scale and make sense of this, like, it challenges a lot of the way that you work, the way that you're effective, the way you're thinking about things. And that's just one framework. And so I find that oftentimes, like, I have these programs that I deliver, I don't have to tweak it too much, the content. It's just that the content evolves differently as we're with different groups. The senior leaders are dealing with the same sorts of issues in a different way, in a different level of complexity that a department chair is, that a group leader is.
Yeah, it's very true, and fundamentally, in all those situations, a lot of it comes down to self-awareness, self-management. You talked about that earlier, and even now, I'm 60, just turned 64 years old.
Yeah.
I've made a life studying these things, and sometimes referred to as an expert in healthcare leadership. And I just a couple months ago really bombed it in the OR one night. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, how did I? Oh my goodness, that was just not how I should act, present myself.
Yeah. Right.
So earlier you mentioned how normal this is, and getting that message out to folks, leaders, learners, that you don't. Nobody's going to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep getting better.
Yeah, and I'm glad that I'm not glad that you I'm glad you shared that not that you experienced that, but I mean, just this week, I had a meeting with a group that I don't know too well, but they're within the organization, it was not the best meeting. I didn't, I approached it. I didn't feel like, and there was a history there, but I really approached it from the perspective of problem, as opposed to solution. I approached it from the perspective of what my team needs as opposed to what we need. And it kind of rocked me a little bit when I was done. And even I'm still kind of processing it. Geez, I don't feel like I was at my best in that circumstance. And so
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on there? What's going on inside me? What do I think, what are the stories kind of I'm telling? What sorts of reparations and, those sorts of things. And this is I would love for this to never happen again, but I think that it just continues happening, and this is part of it.
That's right. Well, somebody wrote a really good book on that. There's,
Yeah, yeah.
stuff that I refer you to about the ROW, row method
Mhm.
of dealing with that. And in light of that, one of the things I wanted you to share with our team, there's a great section in there that talks about you being in the emergency department and going from room to room and room and fixing things and then
Yeah, yeah.
going home
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
sort of staying in that mode. Tell us how you recount that story. That was classic.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is kinda classic, for professionals, and as you use the word expert, like, we're experts in these things, and in our jobs, many of the things that we do rely upon our expertise, our experience, and knowing what to do, kinda given things, and so, yeah, work, walk in, see a patient, take a brief history, and then write orders, right? Not
That's right.
suggestions.
Not suggestions.
No,
As you
these
say
are
it all the
orders. And then, go oftentimes we can, I think, be in, committees and things like that, and still being approaching things that way, but, like, the thing is going home and, my daughters are in high school, and they're having some problems. You know what? I went to high school, and I've dealt with some problems before,
I figured it
and
out.
yeah, and so, after careful consideration, I think, what you need to do is maybe you should have some different friends, or maybe you should, dress something, differently, or maybe and it's that sort of a thing where it's like hearing a problem, knowing what the solution is, in my own
Yeah.
mind, but
Did you just have a prescription pad and just write that
right,
out
here
for
we
her and hand
go.
it to her to
Yeah, you
sign
can
it
fill
with
this
put
anywhere.
your NPI on it and say,
Yeah, right.
here you go. Here's the
Yeah,
fix.
and that yeah, but that doesn't work out. It doesn't work out.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting. You talked earlier about, surgeons and their styles. And I mean, I know my default style is pace setting. And,
mhm.
so I'm running this way, keep up. Right.
Yep. Yep.
But that doesn't work nearly as well in clinic, and it doesn't work well at all at home. And I mean, unless we're on a ski slope together, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, right,
Uh,
right.
but being agile with those different styles as the environment changes is pretty key. But it's easy to fall into the default, right? I mean,
Yeah, and I mean, we can fall back, and so we can be our best in certain environments, but then there are some situations where we fall back to where we're not at our best, maybe in doing things that we know, to process in a different way. And as I think about, for instance, the situation I just faced this week, I hadn't really slept. I mean, honestly, I've been working a lot of shifts, and I hadn't been eating well. There's been a lot of travel. There are some other things going on in other parts, that I've been dealing with, and it was kind of this setup for me to, hopefully not, but to fall back, and I think that's a recognition there too, is to, self acceptance, and to recognize that that's not. us at our best, and how to move forward. The things of and I think we're very much alike in terms of I like to drive stuff, like get results. I want to move forward. Let's keep going. Let's keep. I don't. Let's make a decision, keep moving forward. And there are times when I sense that that's not occurring, when people aren't on the same page, and either I bring people together or I approach it in a way that doesn't bring people together, and it doesn't help me or them.
Yeah. 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 A nice chunk of the book is talking about the different environments that you work in and complexity and when you think of a strong, effective leader in that uncertain environment, the VUCA environment, that um, concept of which goes way, way back. How do you balance being a strong leader and getting the information that you need, creating a psychologically safe environment? Is that all about how much time you have to make the decision, or are there specific leadership traits that you see are more effective?
Yeah, and so to me, we can't have a retreat for every single decision. We can't. You just can't bring everyone together. That'll be ridiculous. That being said, there's times that we need to bring people together and have a bit of a retreat like circumstance. As you're leading, there are decisions you just need to make, and move on. And some of those decisions, you're going to figure out how to get some different perspectives as fast as you can. We like leadership dyads and triads, where you ask your admin and nursing partner, or maybe get your exec group together. But you need to move forward. I think that there's an art there from a leadership perspective of when you're doing each of those things. If you're making too many decisions, people start becoming out of the loop. They don't have a sense of being heard because they're not being heard. If you're asking people too many times to come together, then they're like, dude, what are you doing? This is just make a
We're paying you
decision.
to
I
make
don't.
decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, just let me practice. And so I think that awareness is important. And then as we make decisions, sometimes we think, geez, this should have been something I make a decision on. And then we realize after the fact, nope, there's a little bit else, something else here. And so then just stepping back and then including people. I think that is the agility. Um, and we're agile as we're taking care of patients in the same sort of way. You face something in the OR that wasn't, this is not how we're going to approach. You step back and you think about different approaches. Maybe you're including some others in the decision making. I think though the default a lot in medicine, and like is this concept of meetings where we have meetings, and too often they're not meetings, they're tellings, and I
All
and
right.
I think that's the issue. And so how do we have within our agenda time for us to discuss things that need to be discussed, and what are those things, and how do we move through the sequence of things that just need decisions? That's again the agility.
And where's that balance? Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to call our listeners, watchers, attention to the book again. You're the leader. Now what? Um, Leadership lessons from Mayo Clinic, and to ask you the now what part of the title. You often say nobody's ever ready for a promotion, right?
Yeah.
It's you're being thrown in a new lake, in a
Hmm.
in a new environment. You've never done it before. Now what? How did that come into the title, and what were your implications and thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, the title really came up from as I was coaching physician leaders. They would oftentimes come to me and it's like, now what? What do I do? And the line that I have for that is that, hey, I'm your coach. If you want me to tell you what to do, my fee's a lot more because that would be consulting.
That's right.
You know,
Now I'm a consultant,
yeah. But so
or
then
you can
like how
hire
to
me and I'll be your supervisor, right? Yeah.
right, yeah. But I think it really, I mean, that is it. Like now what? It just keeps, and in my own mind as I face these challenges, that's what comes up is now what. And so as in writing the book and in coaching individuals and working with teams, just trying to help them get the structure there so that the thing I for me, and as I'm doing the stuff that I'm doing, my preference is to use the people I'm working with as the case. I don't want them to study the cases of others. They're the case, like they're having issues, challenges, and let's work through this. And so how to help them understand the frameworks, like get a sense that there's something missing, or how to make sense of this in a different way. And so that's what, for that book, that was my intent, was trying to, in some ways, hoping that people would read it. So then when I'm coaching them or working with them, now we can get to the real, like, okay, now you know some basic kind of stuff. Now, how do we make sense of this?
Yeah, we got a little bit of language
Yep.
to work with. Um, we talk a lot about eliminating unwarranted variation and best practices and guidelines. You take some time to challenge that concept when
Yeah.
it comes to leadership, particularly,
Right.
not necessarily how to manage an acute MI. Um, where does that line get drawn as we think about it from the physician perspective and then the executive perspective?
Yeah. And so, so there's a couple things that come up here is, so I think, wouldn't it be great if things were like the chess board where we had some moves and we can just get things done, but they tend not to be that way. If things are like the chessboard, there are best practices. There are moves that you make. And you brought up like kind of the trauma room. There are best practices there that we have. We know where each person should be at each time, and that's very helpful. There are a lot of people, but it's helpful to have those best practices. And I think for most of us as leaders, that doesn't tend to be too big of an issue. The problem that we face is that the environment's changing, and our best practices are by definition past practices. And so that's the tension. We can be in these meetings and we can be like, oh, so what do we think? And we're like, what are you talking about? We already know what to do. And the fact is that the rest of the world's changing. And what we want is the status quo is actually not the status quo like in the world. And so there is within our organizations, within our specialties, this tension between traditional and what's always worked for us and innovation. And every place I go, the leaders the people talk about being overwhelmed. Um, but yeah, things are changing. And so either we decide that within this kind of overwhelm, we want to try to keep things the same with the status quo, which no longer fits, and our best practices, don't work anymore. Or we try to figure out ways to move forward in a way that helps us care for patients and ourselves in the best way possible. Um,
Yeah, things changing so fast and so much complexity, so much information coming. It's hard to, keep up with just the journal articles and a small subset of a relatively small specialty for me. How much pediatric neurosurgery stuff comes out every month is
right.
one aspect of it. But a lot of times when I'm trying to reassure folks that A, they're not alone, and B, it'll be okay, is to talk about how complicated, how complex, how uncertain and crazy running healthcare systems or US healthcare in general is. And the story that goes along with that very nicely is, three guys that most people have heard of, Bezos, Buffett, and Diamond, put together this big organization, and they were going to revolutionize healthcare and make it efficient and make it transparent and
Yeah, right.
give the consumer choice, and spent, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars over, 3 days short of a 3-year period, hired a CEO and then said, sorry guys, we're out. Too complicated,
Yep.
too hard. And when you've got that kind of management expertise, capability, drive, resources, money, time, people to try to improve U.S. healthcare, it tells you the environment that we're working in is very, very challenging for everybody, and sometimes it makes physicians, leaders, our colleagues, feel a little bit better just to go, "Oh, okay, well, it's complex and we know it, and we still do a pretty darn good job."
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the leadership stuff too, is understanding. what to focus on, and where change is needed right now, and where we need to step back a little bit, and understanding our colleagues, and how and what they know and what they need to know and what they don't need to know. There's just that is in itself something to develop. Change it occurs step by step, brick by brick. I mean, that's what happens. And each of these things is just we're poking the environment to see what happens, and we try to pivot back and learn what works and keep moving forward. Because if we don't, then it doesn't work out so well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes changes happen pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
You mentioned
Yeah.
a few minutes ago, and I'm going to put in a shameless plug, not by brand name, but by technology of an ambient listening system for the EMR.
Right.
I thought I heard you mention that you have used it,
Yeah.
have looked at it, have uh, talk about a life changing tool.
Right.
Very very early on, the first time I flipped it on, we did a test patient with my nurse and APP. And one of them played the patient, and the other, and we just talked for 17 minutes and hit, create note.
Yeah.
And this is in pediatric neurosurgery. I mean, how much can it know about pediatric neurosurgery? Beautiful note.
Yeah.
I might have made two phrase changes,
It's great.
one thing that was duplicate, and you're looking at the patient, you're not typing on the computer, you're sitting there, you're giving it your full attention. And I, was finishing and signing my notes before I moved on to the next patient. I'd never been able to do that before. So for those of you who are listening and who might be, at my age or close to my age and think, this new technology is just another, waste of time. It's not going to be all it's purported to be. Check it out.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that, but
Oh, I mean, I'm deeply involved in AI, and in how we help to organizations adopt it and teams and all those aspects of it. So I think it's and that, but again, that falls back to, and as you've experienced with ambient listening, and there's so many different ambient listening environments out there. It's a game changer and for some, it's even more than for others. But this is a technology that you can see there's lots of opportunity in there. Um, but I think a lot of these things, there's such a flow of information with technology change. There's such a flow with regulatory change. There's such a flow with market changes. There's such a flow of kind of things that it's hard to like be prescriptive and write orders through it. And so then from a leadership perspective, how do we step back and help some of the things develop? And I think a lot of times within groups, there are some individuals who are early adopters, and how are we listening to them and helping them and empowering them? And how do we help them spread the things that are working and maybe the things that aren't working? Um, it's, I think it's a really fun time. But I think technology is something, as we're talking about frameworks and stuff. I mean, we need to be really good at understanding technology and how it serves us, where it doesn't.
mhm. Yeah, sometimes it's a real positive for sure. So,
Yeah.
you spend a fair amount of time in your book talking about creating a shared reality. Step us through that, if you would, from, just one-on-one to small teams, maybe in the clinic or in the ED, all the way to organizational level. There are different
Yeah.
things that you describe to work through those. How does that play out?
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we each of us have is our blind spots. And so the question is, what's
The rhinoceros painting was
yeah,
classic.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah. So there's the picture of the rhinoceros, kind of the cartoon, and then the rhinoceros is painting this elephant and this pastoral scene and this kid in a fruit bowl, and they're like beautiful. But in each of the paintings is the rhinoceros's own horn. Um, and we're just like that. And so, I think the question that I is what's most important is a process or analysis. And many people would say it's the analysis, and they're right. Analysis is very important, but it's really the process of bringing the different analyses that we have together, that helps us look around each other's blind spots. And so, and so that is like this development of shared reality. Now, certainly we can take some time and just think about things like, this is the dance floor versus the balcony perspective, where We can, you're in the OR, something happens and you can react, and it's instinctive. Same thing happens when you're talking to individuals or in meetings, and that can serve you very well. But at times you need to kind of step back and think about things from a different perspective. And so develop shared reality could be just thinking about things from the nursing perspective or the administrative perspective or someone else. That's kind of the first step for an individual. The second thing would be to bring other individuals in. And so what are your thoughts? Like, what are your worries here? What are, what are we doing well? What can we improve upon? What do you see moving forward? And start to develop, this kind of shared perspectives. And the idea is that there should be differences of opinion. There should be a little bit of discomfort, sometimes a lot of discomfort. There should be fears and worries, but that as we get all those things together, it's no longer us looking, kind of through our blind spot, but we're able to get maybe a better picture of the map of what we're trying to deal with. I think for the leader, the question is, when do I individually just take some time and think through it? When do I use my leadership dyad or triad, the physician, nurse administrative partnership? When do I bring exec together or just phone a friend? When do I bring the whole department in? Because the development of shared reality, and helping us see around blind spots, this just comes up. Like I was working with a chair of a, a large department, and they decided they were going to change the schedule to meet the needs of the patients, and it angered people. Really, I mean, they had thought through it as an executive team very well, but they had huge blind spots even within the executive team, and it was a department. Uh, you know, uh, like people were talking about leaving and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where in that department at that time, that decision, it would have been helpful to understand that some people were afraid that with this change, they're not going to be able to take their kid to school, that they're not going to be able to coach their kids, practice on this Thursday, that they can't do their research. And just by having some of those perspectives that that group had made some good decisions but had left out, it would have helped them come up with, in many ways, oftentimes the same decision with some caveats and different approaches that would have preserved those things that people really needed. And
Yeah.
so it's just that it's being able to look around our blind spots, and we all have that. We all have that.
Yeah, we do indeed. You do a lot of coaching of senior leaders. Are there things that you see in the coaching sessions that come up over and over again that our listeners would say, "Oh yeah, I can see myself doing that, and here's how you can do it better."
Yeah, I mean, and this is and these are the senior leaders. It's going to be the same thing for junior leaders. I mean, that's the I speak too much. So there's some who like no, they talk too much. They're interrupting people. They want to control the agenda. That's how they move forward. There are other individuals who, geez, I wish I would speak up more. I'm going to these meetings and I'm with these people that they know so much, and I don't know all these things. They're talking about things, and I want to be able to speak up more. There's individuals who micromanage. They want to be better at delegating. There's individuals who are really comfortable with bringing people together, and are not so good at driving results. There are individuals who are good at driving results, but as they're doing so, they're like not bringing people together. They're kind of separating people. There's individuals that can balance aspects of their lives. There's individuals that can't. I mean, it just keeps on kind of going down the line there. And each of those things, there's ways that we can help, uh, uh, that I can help, you can help, we can help each other kind of understand what's going on, the fears and worries that we have that keep us from moving on and how to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Think back to you choosing to do the MBA program initially. For the folks that are in a position to think, well, I've always kind of thought about getting a graduate degree and learning the things that I don't know, the unknown unknowns, right? What advice do you have for people making those decisions and, the early or mid career doctors who are like, what should I do? How do I make this call?
Yeah. It's funny. One of my colleagues was just asking me, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at talking to the residents about their CVs." And I responded back, "You know what? Actually, I think I may not be the right person to talk to because I actually don't like the CV. I think that I think in many ways what we do is as we have our professions, is we start living our lives to the CV. What would it take for me to do this next step? as opposed to what is it that I'm interested in? What do I want to do? And so I think my advice to people is to pursue things that are interesting to them, where it is valued. It's one thing to have an interest and not have there be value, but I think it's finding those things that you're interested in that value that provide value to the organization in some way, without a concern for what's going to happen 5 years from now, what your role is going to be in the future, because these things all come together. Like I'm using this microphone. I have this fancy setup in front of me. Who would have known that being a high school DJ was gonna come together for me and being on a podcast? Like, these things come together in ways, and I
Yeah.
think the idea that your future role hasn't been written yet. Your future role is gonna fit you perfectly depending on kind of the experiences that you have at your time, and so I think the idea of, being the best you, the most interesting you, as opposed to trying to mimic what the department chair has done or what the, medical director has done or whatever, is just it's the way to go. Um, yeah.
Yeah. If you could take us through really great discussion, very clear differentiation between the concepts of managing, teaching, coaching,
Oh, yeah.
sponsoring.
Yeah.
I think mentoring. A lot of folks mishmash those together or use the terms in ways that might not be the most accurate or most effective. What's your
Right.
take on that?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I think about, like, we wear hats as leaders, and this is a metaphor. Like, don't wear hats. That'd be goofy. People are like, what's up with the hat?
So that
Um, and so I
were you
think
the Spanish Inquisition or something?
yeah, right. Why do you keep changing hats? Um, so the head of teacher, I think we're all familiar with, and so as we're leading, there are things that are going on, and we just need to teach our colleagues, ourselves, what's going on, and so wearing the hat of teacher in those conversations is very helpful. We give people new information, and then with that, okay, I understand. Now let's figure out what to do. There's the hats of mentor and coach. And these are different to me, and this is I think there's tension in the literature. I see these things kind of mishmashed. This is how I define it. A mentor is someone who has, who's an expert, who's been there and done that. Like, they have, experience in some area that we're interested in. And so when we're being mentored by someone, we go to them, to get their perspective, and it's what they do is they help us to see through their eyes. And so when I'm mentoring someone, I'm helping them to see through my eyes what's going on in their experience. And so so this is what I've done before. You may want to do this. You may want to consider these things. Based on my experience, I would suggest this. Maybe you step back. Like, these are all coming from my perspective of the other, and that's mentoring. And so the difference between mentoring and coaching to me is coaching, when we're being coached, someone's helping us not to see the world through their eyes, but through our own eyes.
Yep.
And so when I'm coaching
Yeah,
someone,
it's
hey,
such a great way to put it.
yeah,
It's very clear.
and we can get into, like, but so hey, I hear you saying this. What are your thoughts? On the one hand, you're saying this, and on the other hand, you're saying this. How do you put these things together? As I'm coaching someone, my experience is not involved in this. I'm trying to help them make sense of the world. Now, it's helpful to have been in the arena. I think that it's helpful to have been in the arena, to know the language and those sorts of things. And so while my expertise may be there, I keep it in back, and it's helping me to understand, like, where some of the things, the gaps might be, some of the things that they're saying, where I might poke a little bit. And so we have teacher, mentor, coach. Then there's supervisor, and when we're supervising, I mean, we hold some kind of role within the organization where we're making sure the values of the organization are being met, that we're achieving goals, that we're within kind of our processes and things like that. And so maybe you meet with someone, and hey, I just want you to know you're doing a great job based on, look at your patients, love you, and your quality is great. Good job. On the other hand, hey, there's some opportunity you have to improve here. That's supervisory. And sometimes when leaders get into the position, they overplay that supervisory role, and it tends to be, you need to stop doing this, you need to do that, and that's not so helpful. And then the final head is that a sponsor, and when we're sponsoring someone, what we're doing is we're using our own kind of social capital to advocate for them. And so, hey, Leon's a great guy, and I think he'd do a really good job on this committee. I mean, he's got a lot of experience, and so I'd suggest these resources or this thing and that's so when we're sponsoring someone, that's what we're doing. As we do that, we put our neck out a little bit, because if it doesn't work out, it's a little bit of our own, maybe they won't listen to us in the future.
That's right. You lose a little credibility, maybe.
You lose credibility. But so from a leadership perspective, I think what we do as we're having these conversations with people, we're not just being a mentor or a coach or a teacher. We're actually switching hats during the conversation depending on the needs of our colleague in the moment. And so what does that look like? Oftentimes, it's, hey, so what's going on? That's kind of maybe a coaching thing, and you hear people talk. I don't know if you know this, and you teach a little bit, and then after you've taught them, hey, so what are your thoughts about that? And then you're back into coaching. And hey, I just wanted to show you that this is some data that we're looking at. You're wearing the supervisory role,
Yeah.
and then you go back to coaching. I don't like mentoring. And so this is I think it's great for us to help each other. I think sometimes mentoring gets overplayed. I think it's very easy to get into a conversation with someone and overplay our own expertise without understanding that we're not the expert of someone else's life. What I would rather do is coach them. And if I'm going to mentor them, because sometimes mentorship is needed, I want to try to take myself out of it and say, hey, what I've seen work, I've seen some people approach it in this way, and I've seen some others approach it in this way. That way it's not, this is what I would do. And so I try to offer just some differing perspectives based on experience because, and especially earlier in the careers, we're talking about CVs. Sometimes we have a lot of power over individuals and how they're thinking and making sense of things based on like what we think. And so like, as I approach my daughters, and said, maybe you get different friends. It was based on when I went to high school 30 years ago. And
Mm.
I want them to grow up and make sense of things in their own way.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, nice. Um, we've told a few stories
Mm,
here. That's just natural, right? That's
yeah.
part of being human. But you put some emphasis on leading with story. How does that work in real conversations? When do you decide to pull that tool out of your toolkit?
I think the question is, what is the story here is probably the best thing, for me, the best approach. And again, as I go back to this meeting I had, earlier, I was dancing with my own and my team's perspective as opposed to the full story. It may not have worked out well, still the meeting, because there was, we need to all come together. But I think that what's the story here helps to step back and why are we doing this and what's the goal here? And again, sometimes that doesn't work out, but it is like, and I think, um, what's the story here oftentimes is paired with what is it we're trying to change? What is it that we want? And so I think that's a key, so oftentimes as we're dealing with things, we're talking about the things that aren't working. And I talk about like how as you're skiing, what we're doing is we're talking about the tree and like, don't hit that tree, don't hit that tree. And then you hit the tree. And so we're talking about the things the nurses are doing. We're talking about how this isn't working. We're talking about this sort of thing. And I think it's really helpful to create the story about, so what is it that we want? Like, if we're not going to look at the tree, going to look at where we want to go. And so what is it we want? What are we aiming to do? And I think that's the way of doing it, is looking toward the solution as opposed to the thing that's getting in our way. And then from that, like,
Yeah.
what would we be seeing? What are we seeing now? How has it worked for us in the past? Yeah.
Yeah, nice, 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 nice. So we're kind of wrapping up here. If you've got a new leader or someone's unfortunately doesn't have direct access to you, and you were to give them some advice, you've got a new leader who's walking in, going, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
What are the first few steps that you would suggest they take to know what to do?
I mean, I think that the idea of being a leader is not that you need to know what to do. I think that's probably the number one thing, is we feel like we need to have the answer. We feel like, and in fact, our best leaders don't know the answer. I mean, they approach it in a way that is like, it's like a coach. It's like a facilitator. As I face this challenge, whatever this challenge is, maybe let me put aside my expertise and my experience, and then try to look at it with fresh eyes, try to bring other people in with fresh eyes. And I think that that development of shared reality is probably the first step. Is how do I do that? When do I do it myself? When do I bring a few others in? When do we do it at the department level? I think that's it. But I think the putting aside our own experiences, certainly it gets in the mix there. I think it's number one, because if we think that we're going to change something, and that um, hasn't been changed, and if it doesn't change, it's because of us. I just think that's limited. That's like when we're taking care of a patient who has a whole lifetime of experience, that we're going to be able to write the prescription and fix it. It's just not the reality. The question is, how do we meet the patient where they're at? How do we meet this discussion where it's at? And that comes from having this big picture, or developing it if we need to, and trying to facilitate it and coach it and move forward in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And in a similar way, it brought to mind when I went to the senior service college, what we colloquially refer to as a war college. It's for a bunch of, senior officers who the military thinks are going to be the next generals and admirals. And they talk about the fact that if you've come up, for instance, as an infantry officer, by the time you get to be in your early 40s, you know pretty much everything there is to know about infantry tactics, and you've led at every level. And when a decision needs to be made, everybody looks to you as, quote, the smartest person in the room, and you have the answer. That's very similar to what we see as a, mid to senior doctor, where at the end of a grand rounds presentation, everybody looks to the chief or the chair and says, what's the answer here? And what they say is, when you go from a very high operational level to a strategic level, then the key is not that you have the right answer, but that you can ask the right questions. Because if you're a general or an admiral, then chances are everybody who's briefing you on something knows that stuff better than you ever can. They've spent their whole life in it. And so knowing how to ask the right questions to get the information to make the best decisions is very similar to, what you're describing as building the story, finding out what is the real story here, how do we get this information out so that we can make the best decisions.
I think the second thing is that there is a tendency for us to circle the wagons and shoot outward. And so as we're leading teams, we can talk about what the nurses are doing. We can talk about what the other specialties doing. We can talk about, all those sorts of things. And so that is not the right way to lead. And that is a very comfortable way to lead, because you can just feel like you represent yours, but actually you're not doing well. And so I think from a leadership perspective is to understand, as you hear that sort of polarity, that it's your job then to understand that you're actually missing out on some key information, and to try to get that information in.
Yeah. Super good. Well, listen, this has been great. Typically, when we start to wrap this up, I think I could talk with you for 2 more hours, but respectful of your time, and I appreciate every minute you've been able to spend with me and our listeners. Wish you all the best, and thank you for what you continue to do.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been All Physicians Lead. We can all be better leaders, and our teammates and patients will be the beneficiaries. Go to allphysicianslead.com to unlock your potential, sharpen your impact, and elevate your journey. All Physicians Lead with Dr. Leon Morse is a production of Forbes Books.